Good evening, my friends. This is the Grim Tutor, and welcome to, sadly, the last edition of our grading of these time-shifted, Time Spiral Remastered cards. This has been such a delight. I am the world's number one old border respecter, and this has also been, frankly, a really tough week for me. Tough couple weeks, in fact, at work, and, in general, it's been very stressful, very busy, so these old bordered cards have been a bright spot. They have been a light in my life, and they've also been a source of content that I can make in, like, my one free hour at the end of the day that is not stressful or is not laborious. It's just for fun, but I do want to check in with the more serious content. We will be doing gameplay again soon, some very interesting gameplay, and I will be doing the Battle for the Goyfs tournament top 8 as well, as soon as I am given the raw material to work with. I have some of it, but not all of it. So just checking in, a little housekeeping for you, but let's dive in to the analysis. What do we think about the green, gold, and brown, mostly old bordered cards that we're doing today? And there are a lot of them that have rounded out this beautiful set. So I'm going to try to go through them a little more quickly than I usually do. We'll see how I manage, but to begin is a Reclamation Sage, and I have demanded more old bordered elves and more playable elves. Kaldheim gave us the latter, and this set's giving us the former. You'll love to see it, and Reclamation Sage, a very, very cool one. That said, there is something reminiscent of Liliana's Triumph with regard to this, because there is an interesting, extended bordered, very new feeling version that I actually like significantly better than the original, despite generally preferring both the old border and the old-fashioned art. The old art is okay for X-Age, unlike with Triumph where I really don't like it at all. The old art is okay, but the new art, the game day art, to me blows it out of the water. So while most old bordered elves are automatic A's for the Grim Tutor, I think in this case it is more complicated. I think my advice to you, aesthetically, is that if the old bordered Rex Sage can push you toward a super majority of old bordered elves in whatever deck you're running, then go for it. That will be adding to the overall feel of the deck in a major way. If that's not so much the case, then you might actually still be better off with the game day art, which again, I absolutely love. So with that in mind, I think I have to give any old bordered elf at least a B. I think the Rex Sage works well enough to give it a B+, but the game day art such a strong competitor that I don't think I can go any higher. Next up, we've got Primetime himself, the Primeval Titan. And a quick story, I was scrolling my own Discord on the day that this card was revealed, and I had just gotten caught up. I had just scrolled to the very bottom of the spoilers channel, and I was reflecting on what I'd seen and what people had said. And then somebody, I think it was Mirabito, just posts the old bordered Primetime with no warning. I didn't even see anybody typing or anything like that, and it looked like I was getting ambushed out of nowhere with this gigantic, war-painted, elder giant basically jumping out of the canopy at me. Very frightening and traumatizing experience, and exactly what the Primeval Titan original art from Alexei Bricklot is going for. And there is something a little bit disturbing about it, where you think of something that is so gigantic and powerful, but also operating using stealth, and looks like a very agile giant as well, as far as these things go. And I think all of those characteristics, including the fact that it is just the OG printing, do suit it very well to the old border. That said, and also Primetime is an iconic card in Modern, basically a cornerstone card of the format. Now that said, there are actually some pretty good competitors here for alternative art. Everything I just said about the original printing is true, but we also have to acknowledge that the name Primeval Titan also does lend itself really well to this promo art, where you have something more earthbound and more hefty, more girthy, this girthy boy, very much a primeval force of nature as well. And I think the art itself is very well executed. And, would it suit the older border better? Probably not, but definitely a very fine card to register in general. And then you have the Secret Lair. And I'm sure this won't be to everybody's taste, but to me, this giant Secret Lair set that they did absolutely kills it. The frame does a lot of work here. The frame is very, very cool. This, Kaldheim promo frame, basically. And then when you look at the art itself, it's very stylized. It almost looks more like a wood cutting or a stained glass window or something like that. And I personally love it. I think the Croaks is killer too. The Prime Time, very, very cool. So I fully support the decision to time shift the original Prime Time. I think it's the correct art and a very good choice. But the competing alternative art options are so strong that I have to give it only an A-, but this is definitely a chase card of the set, and as I say, very well decided upon and very well executed. Ancient Stirrings. You know, a lot of big mama cards in this set. This is no exception, and, we just have to deal with it. Well, if we're getting beaten by them, at least we have a more aesthetically pleasing experience while doing so, right? Now, Ancient Stirrings is an example of an effect that I've talked about in previous videos in this series. That is that Stirrings art is something that has never drawn my eye directly. I have a general idea of what it looks like, but I've never looked at it that closely. The art itself in the new frame does not compel me to look at it closely for whatever reason. And of course it'd be different if I actually played Stirrings decks, right? And I'm sitting there looking at my hand while the opponent goes off and I'm thematically interested in the deck and whatever. But that's not the case, so as an opponent of Stirrings, I've never looked all that closely at it. The time shifting of this printing to the old frame forces me. It draws my eye to look more closely at it, and I like what I see. It's actually a fabulous piece of art. It suits the old frame really, really well. And like I said, there are a few other examples of this, but this just shows you how important the framing is and why this is such a cool topic for me to cover, I think. So I'm giving this one an A+. I think this is a massive, massive upgrade. And the only other Ancient Stirrings art is one that is not for me. It's a cat, and the cat people will love this. The cat people will come after me for disrespecting their favorite printing. I understand. I'm ready for it. Bring it on, cat people, right? But, this is just not an art I would ever use. I think the original printing is vastly superior in terms of what I like and what I'm getting out of the game, and the time shifting suits it to a T. A+. Next is another Tron card, the Thragdaddy himself, and you know what? You might think I gave Stirrings an A+, why not this one? There's not even another alternative art to consider for Thragtusk, but it's not an A+ for me, more like a B+, or perhaps an A-, and here is why. So, to me, the Thragtusk art is about as good. It's good, definitely, in general, and it's about as good as the Stirrings art in the new frame. But whereas the old frame makes the Stirrings art, really, really pop, I don't think the old frame suits Thragtusk as well. It doesn't really improve it, really at all, maybe a little bit. But basically, I think it has a lot to do with the color palette here. We're seeing a muted reddish brown on the Thragdaddy himself. Otherwise, it's just a lot of greenery. It's very lush, and there's also some whitish light breaking through the canopy. And when you look at the new frame, it actually is the same thing, and it just basically makes the piece almost feel like it's extended art within a traditional frame. And then you have the gold M13 symbol here kind of delightfully popping. You look at the time-shifted version, and I don't really know, my eye doesn't really know where to rest. It also ends up feeling a little bit washed out. There is a clash between kind of the white-ish light and the pure white of the Thragtusk title and the beast type line, whereas the kind of off-white of the new frame suits it better. So the more I'm talking about it, I don't even know if it gets as high as a B- or an A, or a B+ or an A-. I think I actually have to give the Thragdaddy, and I hope he doesn't gore me for this, a solid B. Next, we've got Nature's Claim, and I am seriously impressed by this one, my friends. The original printing is actually not what was time-shifted. This Raul Vitali conspiracy printing was second. This came second, as far as I can tell, and the original World Wake printing from Darkin was not time-shifted. Now, I like Darkin a lot as an artist, but I completely agree with this decision. It's actually interesting to think of this, but we basically have... I'm getting a Lord of the Rings vibe from both options for Nature's Claim. The dark and original printing is kind of when in the old forest, when the trees come to life and threaten to devour the hobbits whole, right? This is an example of a trespasser potentially facing their just deserts in a forest that is more than it seems, and nature is, coming alive. It is stopping action with other action, right? In a way that is unexpected and frightening. The Raoul Vitali piece is something very different. This also, again, reminds me of Lord of the Rings in a very different way, maybe of some of the kind of fallen ruins of cities or of the holdings of men in the shadow of Morgul now, maybe outside of Gondor or something like this, and there's still some beauty to be found even though darkness has cast a pall over the land. There is also not as much a feel of immediate danger, but more a feel of ancientry, a feel of the past kind of crumbling and us living in the wake of that. And to me, both pieces are good, both pieces represent the card well, and both pieces are well executed, but the latter is 100% the correct decision to time shift thematically. Also, in terms of the color palette, it's already very well done. It already looks really nice in the new frame, but the old frame makes all of those colors really, really pop, and again, lends itself overall even better to that feel of ancientry. So this Nature's Claim, even though it's not a card I'm used or I'm hyped about in a sense that I'm going to get this card so I can use it, this has got to be an A+. It is so, so good. A classic exemplar of why the time-shifting process is so successful and so cool. Next, we've got Coarser of Trophics, which is a card that I could use. It's been a one of in Rock before. It could be again. Maybe I'll try my hand at a deck where it's maybe a little bit more of a central focal point at some point. But, what do we think about Coarser and the decision to time shift it? Well, I think the Centaur creature type is pretty cool, and it's good to have one in there as far as the time shifting goes. It does feel like that creature type in some ways belongs as much, if not more, to the old border as to the new. Now, as for the piece itself, there are actually two options here for Coarser, and they're both relatively similar in that they depict a centaur front and center. There's not a huge amount of difference between the centaurs themselves. It's more what's going on around them. This promo version is, the centaur's on a rocky cliffside, and is perhaps manifesting a vision or something that is a cool reference point relative to the card's ability, whereas this other Coarser is a little bit, it's kind of doing something similar maybe on its body, but it has more of a vigilant kind of sentry-style feel, and I like the background of this one a whole lot. Both art I would rate as good, but not in the very, very top tier, and I suppose this original printing is probably the correct one. I think the blues in the background, which I really like, in the original piece stand out even more in the old frame. So this one doesn't quite blow my mind as much as some of the other ones, but I also find it pretty hard overall to criticize anything about it. So let's settle on an A-. Beast Within is next, and this card does feel a little bit more like it should be time shifted, and I don't exactly know why, but when I saw that they had time shifted Beast Within, I said, oh, that makes sense, right? That makes sense to me. Now, there are two printings for Beast Within, and they both kind of depict the same thing happening in that you almost have like a alien, as in the movie Alien, one thing emerging from inside the other thing, which is a little bit disturbing. The original printing, though, is from New Phyrexian. It has a very distinctly Phyrexian flavor to the art, whereas the other one is a more literal beast emerging in the traditional Magic Gathering, like what a green beast looks like, emerging from, what could be an elf, or it's a humanoid, right? So this could belong to any number of sets, whereas the original printing unmistakably Phyrexian in character. And now, I mentioned this when we talked about Dismember. Not all contrasts are created equal. Not all contrasts are good because they are a contrast or because they subvert tropes or whatever it might be. But in the case of Phyrexian stuff being contrasted with the old border, I find that delightful. I think that's very, very well welcome every time I have seen it, and this is no exception. So I think they made the correct choice, therefore, to time shift this art, and I think it's a good decision to time shift it. I'm going to give it an A. I like this one a lot. Next up, we have Evolutionary Leap, and this is the only art. So to me, usually when it's the only art and it gets time shifted, that makes it like an A minus minimum. I don't know if I can go that high though with this card, and here is why. So basically, one of the reasons I was attracted to the Rock as my first like all-in modern deck, and the reason I think it's cool, is because the new frame actually suits itself well to the Golgari vibe. I think there are some cool old bordered Golgari cards, but they have to be literally Golgari. Like they have to be gold bordered and black and green. This is not a gold card. It's not a strictly Golgari card, but of course the art is Golgari as it gets. You have the Medusa snake-like aspect of the central figure. You have an obviously green card, but one that is very much kind of immersed in shadow. It is Golgari in feel and flavor, no doubt about it. And also, of course, you're sacrificing a creature, so the mechanics are Golgari-esque as well, despite it being a mono green card. Therefore, I actually think it suits the new frame. The old frame, something feels incongruous, something doesn't feel right. There is an unwelcome contrast here, an unwelcome kind of lack of setting here that I think the new style of art in the Golgari vein clashes actually with the old border. Maybe things would feel a little bit better if we had a black mana symbol somewhere in the text box. I don't exactly know. But to me, this doesn't quite fit. Again, I think the Golgari style suits the new frame a little bit more, unless it is strictly in the gold colors. So I think overall, I'm teetering here. 1 point in favor of time shifting this card is to the extent that it would see play. It's going to be a central, kind of a centerpiece of the deck. You're going to be built around this effect and maybe other similar effects. And also, if you resolve it, it's probably going to stay on the table for a long time. You're going to see it a lot. It's going to be a literal centerpiece on the table as you're playing. So it's cool to have an old border for that. But given some of the other criticisms I just made, I think I'm going to settle on a B plus for this Evolutionary Leap. Definitely something that doesn't quite stray as high as A minus or above for me. Become Immense. Now, this one is pretty cool. This is classically an Infect card, and Infect these days feels more like an older deck. It hasn't really been the meta force post Modern Horizons 1. And mind you, we're coming up close to Modern Horizons 2, as it was beforehand. It's had its spikes in the meta, but it's never really been the meta force that it once was. And to that end, it actually makes sense to time shift an Infect card, because it just feels like an older deck these days. It feels just older, right? Besides that, I don't know how much I love it, because, again, there is something about the Tarkir block that does suit the new frame. Not all Tarkir block cards will translate that well to the old frame. For me, this is kind of a medium fit in the old frame. Something about the figure, maybe the proportions of the figure depicted, or maybe the detailing would be a little more vague on a card that was commissioned back when the old border was the only border. So I'm also teetering with this one. Maybe I follow suit with my previous rating, give this one a B plus as well. This next one, however, my friends, knocks it out of the park. We have Time of Need, which is a card that sees like no modern play, and therefore I have no real attachment to it. I have no inherent awe of it, right? Nor any apparent need for it myself. But this is a Kamigawa block card, and to me, the Kamigawa block cards, all the ones that I've seen, and all the ones that I can also think of off the top of my head, they suit the new border pretty well, and they suit the old border really well. I think you just can't really go wrong time shifting most Kamigawa block cards, and this is no exception. I think this is a fantastic looking piece. I think it's a pretty unique effect, definitely. Even though it doesn't really see modern play, feels powerful enough to merit a time shifting. And also, it's the only art out there, so I'm giving it an A. And if it kind of looked somewhat bad in the new frame and also looked as good as it does in the old frame, I would even be willing to go all the way up to an A+. But because it does suit the new frame very well as well, I think this one is just a good old A. Definitely a very, very big success, though, if you ask me. Next up is Farseek, which I do find very interesting. There is a lot of big mana going around, as we said. Now, there are 2 copies of Farseek. The first one, the one that they time-shifted, is the original. It is from Ravnica. And to me, this is an unmistakably Ravnican card given the setting. And I would also contend that I do not think all, on-the-nose Ravnica scenes would translate that well to the old border. This one, however, does, and does in a big, big way. Why? Well, I think if you look at the architecture depicted here in this Ravnica piece, there's so many straight lines, there's so many squared off surfaces. It is appealing, but if you look at the new frame, the text box, but especially the type line and the title, those are kind of competing, right? Those are kind of other squared off structures that are competing and in some ways detracting from the architecture as depicted. Whereas if you look at the same exact art in the old Farseek border, that's a very, very different story. There is nothing about the old border that is samey or competitive. In fact, all it does is set the stage to really let the artwork shine, and the architecture really pops here, so I'm a big fan. I think this is a huge upgrade. I would give this one an A+, if the competition wasn't so stiff. And there's only one alternative art, but to me, this alternative art is awesome. It's stunning. I don't even know if I've ever really seen anybody use this against me before, and I don't know why, because to me it's beautiful. I really just, the whole thing is great, but the figure in the foreground is what makes it. The staff that she's holding, the hair, the whole thing is great, and you just get a sense of epic adventure as you, alongside her, virtually look out over this sprawling expanse. So I think this is a really strong printing. I do love, though, the time shifting of the original Ravnica piece as well. A. Only stop from an A+, because the alternative art is also still really good. The big mana hits just keep on coming with Sylvan Scrying, and there are 3 choices for Sylvan Scrying. The one that has been time-shifted is not the original one. It is Battle for Zendikar, and we see kind of a muted, monotone, alien landscape that I think is pretty well executed, with the waterfall, the water source, being the only really source of vitality of color. And, that's definitely, that is what it is. I like it. I think it's well done. The 3 Sylvan Scryings are very different. The original one's from Mirrodin, and in this case we have a little bit of kind of arcane technology going on here, but very elven as well, very Sylvan, I dare say, whereas the Sylvan Scrying, I don't know if the name is very well represented in this BFZ, even though I like the piece. This elf one, I don't know if the mechanics are well represented, even though I like the piece and I think it's true to the name and the flavor. And then we have the, I guess, F&M promo, where I don't know if it's quite as impressively executed as the other 2 overall, but it is cool. There is some geometry involved here, so maybe this is reminiscent of Tron in some way. It's difficult for me to have a favorite here. I think I like them all about the same. I like different things about each of them, and none of them are completely mind-blowing. So which one should have been time-shifted? Well, I think we might be running into too much green if we time-shifted this F&M one. And it's already an F&M promo, so it's already kind of unique in that sense, so that's fair enough. And that brings it down to either the Mirrodin or the BFC, and I don't know. I think the BFC, the contrast is nice. I think the BFC one is majorly improved by the time-shifting process, but would the Mirrodin one have been improved as much? I think maybe. We'd also see a lot of green here, but it wouldn't feel washed out. It would feel immersive in the theme of a Sylvan Scrying, so I don't know what to rate this here. I think I'm going to settle on an A-. I think either time-shifting the one that they did or the Mirrodin one would have been a big, big improvement. And just because there are other question marks, I'm going to leave it there. But yeah, A- about right for this one for me.